General Motors is cutting 1,200 jobs at its Detroit electric vehicle plant.
The Detroit News says GM is downsizing.
Imagine a country built on horsepower, chrome, and the roaring confidence that bigger is always better. For decades, America's love affair with massive trucks and towering SUVs seemed unstoppable, a cultural engine humming along with the certainty of infinite growth. But what if that engine suddenly began to sputter? What if the machines that once symbolized prosperity, strength, and unshakable optimism turned into symbols of a looming economic fracture? Today, we explore a scenario that once felt unthinkable, a nationwide slowdown in the market built around the largest, most profitable vehicles on the road. Picture this. It's early morning in the Midwest. Dew settles on row after row of enormous trucks, each one gleaming under the rising sun. Normally, these lots would empty by noon, but now they sit still, silent, untouched. Dealership showrooms that were once buzzing with eager buyers have grown eerily quiet. Sales desks are empty, phones ring without being answered. Across the industry, whispers spread of canceled orders, tightening credit lines, and a nationwide shift in what Americans can or are willing to afford. In this imagined scenario, automakers are caught off guard. For years, they've poured billions into full-size SUVs and luxury trucks, convinced the demand would never end. Factories expanded, production targets soared, marketing campaigns promised toughness, prestige, and limitless capability. But as economic pressures mount and household budgets strain, the market built on excess begins to crack. Families who once stretched their finances for the biggest model on the lot now look for something smaller, cheaper, more practical. And as interest rates climb, even those modest purchases slow to a crawl. You can almost feel the tension spreading from boardrooms to backlots. Production lines designed to operate at full capacity are forced into abrupt pauses. Storage yards overflow. Some dealers, in desperate attempts to move metal, resort to creative tactics, marking new vehicles as demo units, offering unusual trade-in deals, or stacking incentives that would have been unthinkable just a year before. Yet even these measures fail to break the stalemate. Behind the scenes, financial pressure intensifies. Banks grow wary of extending credit. Insurance rates rise. And as inventory piles up, the cost of simply holding these vehicles begins to outweigh the profit they were supposed to bring in. In this hypothetical world, a perfect storm is forming. Declining demand, rising costs, shrinking margins, and an industry struggling to pivot after years of leaning heavily on one segment. But perhaps the most unsettling shift is cultural. For the first time in decades, Americans begin questioning the value of size, power, and prestige on wheels. The trucks that once symbolized independence and success now feel like anchors. Heavy, expensive, and increasingly impractical. And as consumer attitudes evolve, a larger question emerges. What happens to an industry that built itself on the assumption that bigger is always the answer? Today's story dives into that transformation. Not a prediction, but a possibility. Not a crisis set in stone, but a window into what might happen when an unstoppable appetite meets an immovable reality. In the early 2020s, the foundations of the American auto market began to shift in ways few analysts truly anticipated. What had long seemed like a stable, predictable industry, powered by steady consumer demand, generous financing, and a cultural attachment to large vehicles, started showing quiet but unmistakable signs of strain. By the beginning of 2024, those signs had coalesced into unmistakable pressure points, forming the first cracks of a broader crisis. Rising interest rates were only the surface-level explanation, but they triggered a chain reaction across an economy already stretched thin. The Federal Reserve's rate hikes were intended to cool inflation, yet their unintended side effect was an abrupt tightening of auto financing. Monthly payments on new vehicles skyrocketed, pushing the average close to levels that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Families who once swapped vehicles every 3 or 4 years suddenly found themselves locked into aging cars because upgrading had become financially impossible. Beneath this financial strain lay a deeper structural problem: household debt. By 2024, Americans collectively carried record levels of credit card, housing, and student loan debt. Auto loans were no exception, with delinquencies rising faster than at any time since the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. But unlike that earlier downturn, this one was driven not by mass unemployment or collapsing asset values, but by simple affordability. Vehicles had grown dramatically more expensive over the previous decade, especially larger SUVs and trucks that became the profit engines of the industry. The average price of a full-size pickup had drifted well beyond the reach of middle-income households, yet manufacturers continued pushing new trims, packages, and technological upgrades that further inflated prices. Compounding the problem, insurance premiums surged nationwide. While the official explanations cited rising repair costs, more complex vehicle electronics, and an increase in severe weather claims, internal reports from several insurers, according to industry insiders, suggested something more subtle was unfolding. Larger vehicles, particularly premium trucks and high-end SUVs, had become disproportionately expensive to insure, not simply because they cost more to repair, but because they were involved in a rising number of high-cost collision claims. Some fictionalized studies circulating within the industry even claim that the newest generation of oversized trucks had repair bills averaging 18% higher than their predecessors due to sensor-packed bumpers, automated towing systems, and ultra-large wheel assemblies. Whether or not those internal numbers were entirely accurate, the effect on premiums was very real. For many households, insuring a new truck added hundreds of dollars per month to the cost of ownership. Meanwhile, subtle but growing consumer fatigue with bigger is better quietly took hold. For years, marketing departments had succeeded in positioning large vehicles as aspirational essentials, symbols of status, power, and freedom. But as economic pressure increased, that symbolism began to sour. A truck costing more than a year's rent no longer represented achievement, it represented financial risk. Dealerships reported a noticeable shift in customer conversations, with more buyers asking about fuel efficiency, long-term maintenance, and the possibility of downsizing. Even in suburban regions dominated by oversized vehicles, whispers of doubt grew louder. Some fictional dealership surveys suggested that nearly 40% of buyers who initially came in searching for a full-size SUV left with interest in a crossover or used vehicle instead. At the same time, manufacturers had spent years investing heavily in production lines optimized for large platforms. This created a mismatch between what companies were building and what customers could reasonably afford. Internally, some automaker analysts, according to speculative accounts, warned executives as early as 2022 that the pricing trajectory was unsustainable. But in an environment of high profits, those warnings were easy to overlook. Automakers continued pushing premium models, confident that demand would remain strong. All of these financial and cultural shifts created a precarious foundation by 2024. Rising rates, record debt, soaring insurance costs, and the creeping realization that large vehicles no longer fit the budgets or lifestyles of many Americans formed a perfect storm of pressure. It was a storm the industry had been drifting toward for years, but only now was it becoming impossible to ignore. Throughout 2024 and into early 2025, the American auto market experienced one of its most dramatic consumer shifts in decades: the sudden and sustained collapse in demand for full-size SUVs and pickup trucks. What had once been the crown jewels of dealership showrooms, the massive, gleaming machines that defined American automotive identity, were now becoming symbols of overstretch, excess, and economic vulnerability. Consumers who had spent years chasing bigger engines, taller frames, and more luxurious interiors were beginning to rethink their priorities. The change was not immediate or explosive, but gradual and steadily accelerating, like a tide turning against a long-favored shore. At first, it showed up subtly in dealership feedback, with more families asking about hybrid crossovers or inquiring why trucks had become so expensive to insure. But within months, the shift was unmistakable. The appetite for large vehicles was shrinking and shrinking fast. A major driver of this shift was affordability. Trucks and full-size SUVs had climbed to unprecedented price levels, with many configurations exceeding $70,000 or even $90,000. For years, buyers had accepted these increases as the cost of modern engineering, new technology, and enhanced comfort. But as wages stagnated and financing costs surged, the psychological boundary of what felt reasonable collapsed. Even longtime truck owners, people who had never imagined driving anything smaller, began reconsidering. Some dealers reported that customers who previously purchased top-trim trucks every 3 years were now showing up asking for the most basic models or even looking for used vehicles under $25,000. And although this shift was rooted in real economic pressure, it was reinforced by cultural changes. Younger generations in particular expressed less attachment to oversized vehicles, viewing them not as aspirational symbols, but as burdensome, impractical machines that were too big for city parking and too expensive to run. Fuel prices, though fluctuating, contributed to the sense that owning a large vehicle had become increasingly impractical. While gas did not reach historic highs during this period, even moderate increases pushed already strained households to reconsider their options. A few fictional consumer surveys conducted by independent research groups suggested that nearly 27% of potential buyers had abandoned the idea of a large SUV solely due to concerns about fuel consumption. Although these figures were not widely publicized, they highlighted the growing anxiety around operating costs. Families who once embraced the power and size of full-size trucks now found themselves gravitating toward efficient compact crossovers, hybrid sedans, and even small electric vehicles as rising monthly expenses forced a recalibration of priorities. The psychological shift was equally significant. Over the previous decade, automakers had marketed large vehicles as essential lifestyle companions, promising adventure, rugged independence, and an elevated social image. But as economic uncertainty intensified, those messages lost their impact. The vehicle that once projected status now projected financial strain. Online discussions grew more critical of large trucks, with influencers and journalists pointing out how oversized vehicles dominated parking lots, clogged suburban streets, and created safety concerns for smaller cars. A fictional viral post from a popular automotive commentator described modern trucks as the high heels of the road, impressive, towering, and completely impractical for everyday life, sparking millions of views and fueling debate about whether America's obsession with size had finally reached a breaking point. Dealers began to observe a striking pattern. Potential buyers would enter the showroom drawn to the big trucks on display, yet within 30 minutes, many had migrated to the compact section. Salespeople reported that conversations no longer revolved around horsepower or towing capacity, but around insurance quotes, maintenance costs, and total monthly payments. One dealer in Colorado claimed that 9 out of 10 full-size truck inquiries ended with customers shifting their interest to mid-size crossovers. Whether or not that figure was fully accurate, it captured the spirit of the broader trend. Meanwhile, automakers struggled to redirect buyer interest. Incentives, discounts, and aggressive marketing campaigns yielded limited results. A hypothetical internal memo from a major manufacturer suggested that brand loyalty toward big vehicles had eroded faster than at any time in the last 20 years, with consumers displaying unprecedented skepticism toward the value proposition of premium trucks. Even models with historically unshakable reputations saw double-digit declines in showroom conversions. The shift wasn't merely about financial limitations, it represented a fundamental change in how Americans saw their vehicles. The era when bigger automatically meant better was fading. In its place emerged a more cautious, pragmatic mindset, shaped by economic pressure, evolving cultural values, and the realization that owning a massive vehicle no longer aligned with the financial reality of most households. By mid-2024, the growing tension between production and actual buyer demand had begun to evolve into a deeper structural imbalance that the industry could no longer ignore. What had started as a mild oversupply, born from optimistic forecasting and years of record profits, transformed into a full-scale mismatch between what automakers continued to build and what consumers increasingly refused to buy. The warning signs had been visible, yet production pipelines were slow to change, partly because retooling factories was expensive, and partly because executives believed the dip in sales would correct itself. Many in the industry privately admitted later that they were victims of their own momentum. After years of runaway success with high-margin trucks and SUVs, the idea that demand might collapse felt almost absurd. But the numbers told the story. Factory lots across the Midwest swelled with inventory as shipments continued at near normal pace. Some fictional reports described temporary holding areas improvised from abandoned shopping mall parking lots, where thousands of unsold trucks sat under the summer sun, row after silent row. Dealerships began running out of space months before the crisis peaked. Some rented farmland on the outskirts of town to store overflow inventory, covering acres with vehicles that, only a few years earlier, would have been sold within days. Internal dealer communications, partly speculative, partly based on real trends, suggested that more than 60% of the trucks shipped to certain regions were going straight into storage rather than onto the showroom floor. The imbalance did not stem from production errors alone. It was rooted in outdated assumptions. Automakers had not only maintained but increased output on large vehicles, even as early indicators showed shrinking demand. Executives were hesitant to idle plants, fearing investor backlash and union pushback. Slowing production would have required admitting that the market had shifted permanently, not temporarily, and that was a message no one wanted to send. This oversupply collided head-on with tightening finances at the dealership level. Flooring loans, the lines of credit dealers used to finance their inventory, became increasingly burdensome as interest rates rose. Dealers were now paying significantly more just to keep vehicles on their lots, turning what had once been manageable overhead into a crushing monthly expense. Some dealerships paid more in interest on unsold inventory than they earned from actual sales. Several fictionalized accounts describe dealers resorting to small personal loans, credit cards, or even pawning assets to keep businesses afloat. At the same time, banks began scrutinizing creditworthiness more aggressively. A wave of loan defaults earlier in the year made lenders cautious, and some banks quietly reduced exposure by tightening dealer financing, even cutting off lines of credit for smaller, rural dealerships that had long been considered stable. With financial pressure mounting, dealers adopted increasingly desperate measures to reduce their stockpiles. Standard incentives, rebates, low-interest financing, loyalty discounts no longer worked. Customers simply did not want large vehicles regardless of how attractive the offers seemed. Reports circulated of dealers labeling new trucks as used after minimal mileage increases to gain access to different financing categories or to lower insurance premiums. While some of these tactics had genuine precedent, others bordered on invented folklore, like stories of dealers forming shell companies to sell vehicles and immediately lease them back to real customers under more favorable terms. Whether or not every anecdote was true, the overall picture was clear. The traditional playbook had failed, and dealers were improvising in real time to survive. Manufacturers also scrambled to respond, but their interventions were uneven and often misaligned with ground realities. Some offered subsidized interest programs that reduced the financial burden on dealerships, while others rolled out bonuses for every unit removed from inventory. But these programs focused on movement, not on solving the underlying problem of misdirected production. Fictional internal memos from a major automaker suggested executives considered offering buybacks or scrapping incentives, actions unheard of in the modern industry, before abandoning the idea due to cost concerns. In some regions, manufacturers pressured dealers to accept even more inventory in exchange for short-term relief on loan payments, a move that temporarily masked financial strain but worsened the long-term situation. The most critical shift, and in many ways the most chaotic, came from the operational breakdown inside the dealerships themselves. Sales teams accustomed to steady commissions suddenly found themselves fighting for every customer. The psychological atmosphere changed. Showrooms grew more tense, conversations more strained. Employees took pay cuts to avoid layoffs, and managers juggled schedules to keep morale from collapsing. Customers, sensing the shifting power dynamics, became bolder in negotiations. They pushed for deeper discounts and walked away without hesitation when dealers refused. Some fictional dealership surveys suggested that customers now expected discounts of 20% or more on large vehicles, levels far outside sustainable margins. Lease deals, previously a reliable tool for moving expensive models, plummeted to their lowest volume since the financial crisis of 2008. The combination of higher borrowing costs and falling vehicle values made leasing unattractive and risky. Desperation sometimes bred questionable decisions. A few dealerships, in fictionalized but plausible scenarios, began staging emergency clearance events, advertised as once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, only to reveal vehicles with inflated original prices, crossed out in red to exaggerate the discount. Others hosted midnight sales with aggressive, almost theatrical marketing campaigns, claiming the truck market is collapsing, act before it's too late. These efforts produced short-lived spikes in foot traffic, but did little to ease the overall inventory crisis. Many customers arrived merely out of curiosity, leaving empty-handed after realizing that even drastically marked-down SUVs still exceeded their budgets. As this chaos unfolded, interactions between dealers and manufacturers grew increasingly strained. Retailers pleaded for production cuts, especially on the largest models, but corporate schedules were difficult to unwind quickly. Some executives publicly reassured investors that the downturn was temporary, even while privately acknowledging severe risk. Others tried to pivot production towards smaller models or hybrids, though these adjustments required months of retooling. In fictional internal correspondence, frustrated dealers accused manufacturers of suffocating the retail network with vehicles nobody wants, while manufacturers countered that dealers were failing to adapt to new sales strategies. The truth, as often happens, lay somewhere in between. Both sides were trapped in a system optimized for a reality that no longer existed. The crisis also reshaped competitive dynamics among dealerships. Larger multi-location groups had the resources to survive months of slow sales, while smaller independent operations struggled. Some joined forces in unusual coalitions, sharing storage space, pooling marketing budgets, or negotiating collectively for better manufacturer terms. Others attempted to diversify by expanding into service contracts, used car sales, or even equipment rentals. But for many, these efforts came too late. Fictional bankruptcy filings from a few regions depicted once thriving dealerships shuttering overnight, leaving customers with pending service agreements and employees without notice. What became unmistakably clear was that the turmoil of overproduction, financial strain, and desperate survival tactics were not isolated problems, but interconnected failures across the entire ecosystem. Manufacturers, dealers, lenders, and consumers were all reacting to a shockwave created by a market that had fundamentally changed. The industry's reliance on a single high-margin segment had left it vulnerable, and once demand dried up, the ripple effects spread everywhere. In this environment, improvisation replaced strategy, desperation replaced confidence, and the once mighty symbol of American automotive strength, the oversized truck, became a burden weighing down the very system that had elevated it for so long.